Next up, we'll be talking to CG supervisor Damien Gray, who will tell us how they built the pipeline for the Lego movie. It's amazing what effort they put into it to stay true to the material and make working for the film as fun and creative as possible. We also will talk about how your career can make unexpected turns and maybe bring you to jobs that you didn't plan on doing at first.
My first question will be, what kind of job is that actually?
Well, probably I can best describe the role of a CG supervisor as someone that has to take the creative vision of the directors and turn that into workflow and processes for the artists so that they can deliver to the scale and the scope of their vision.
And what did that mean specifically for the Lego movie? I mean, managing those assets must have been an immense challenge. How did you go about that?
Well, from the beginning, the brief was to be photoreal, and it was basically they wanted to capture the sort of the spirit, the charm, and the inventiveness of brick films. So brick films are films that have been made by fans in stop motion style with real Lego minifigs. So usually that's with a lot of amateur equipment, you know, with you know, not really high-end lenses or anything like that. So there's kind of always a handmade feel to those sorts of films. So that was kind of the brief going in. So we wanted to create something that was photoreal, that looked stop motion, but of course was done in CG. So of course CG, it naturally is very precise, it interpolates very cleanly, the surfaces are very clean. So we spent a lot of time taking that as a starting point and figuring out ways that we could actually put that handcrafted look into all of the assets. So I think one of the first things that sort of struck us was that, well, why don't we actually just literally make everything from Lego bricks? So rather than building, you know, a cube and then texturing that with, you know, some displacement so that it looks like it's made from individual bricks, we went about a process of literally building something from the ground up from individual bricks. So to that end, we started the building of a massive Lego library. So we basically took, I think in the end it was 2008 individual bricks, and we modeled those up so that they could be rendered in subdiv. And then we went through a process of actually layering up textures, so scratches and dents and warping and mold lines and fingerprints, and putting a lot of effort in putting that imperfection into each and every brick. So of course it doesn't just stop there, because you can't just surface a brick and then put 100 of them into a wall and expect it to look photoreal. Of course it's going to look like there's a lot of duplication there. So we went about and added additional variations to a lot of our bricks. So we had a team working quite solidly for some time modeling and surfacing bricks before we actually got to a point where we actually could easily assemble an asset and make it look photoreal. So at least from an assets point of view, that was the big challenge in constructing and building a brick library, but then also the pipeline that actually fed that and actually enabled us to build assets and to deliver those assets to animation and lighting, so that they could actually manipulate them at a brick level as well.
To build all those models, did you actually also manage like the pre-made things that were built, like houses and stuff like that?
So we had a look around at a number of things. The community was doing a lot of good work in sort of like a CAD type program that was open source called Eldraw. We had a look at that. We also looked at an application from Lego themselves. They had come out a number of years ago with an application called Lego Digital Designer. So that was that's something that's freely available now. You can download it, and you can virtually play with all of the bricks in their library and assemble models. So we looked at this and thought this is a great tool because it comes from Lego. It has the full library of Lego bricks. And the nice thing about it was we had a look at sort of, under the hood at what it was producing. At the end of the day, it's producing a text file when you save a model, which is a parts list. So that was perfect for us because we could take that and we could then inject that into our pipeline and reassemble assets in Maya from this parts list. But from the very beginning, we had a tool that already had all of the knowledge of how each brick interconnects and had a full library of bricks there. And it was an application that was designed at children. I think the initial intent was that children would download this application, build their models, click a button, and then would order the actual real model from Lego. I think they've disabled that functionality right now in the application, but you can still download it. And there's a vibrant community out there building Lego Digital Designer models and uploading them to the internet for everyone to share. So that was a great resource for us. Basically we could put that tool in the art department as well, and we could rapidly design things in the art department that were very brick-centric, that had out of the box, that were quintessentially Lego. We did a lot of sketching and drawing, and it's very difficult to draw something that precise, but here we have an application where we can very quickly mock something up with bricks. Of course, then we had to have the whole back-end pipeline and the brick library and the 2,800 bricks to support that so that we could push it into animation and lighting. But from the very beginning, in terms of a design sense, here we had a tool out of the box that we could really rapidly start modeling up 3D designs.
So you actually did concepts in these tools?
Yes. Yes. Interesting. So we actually had some set designers that had never really played with Lego before, but they sat down and spent many days in LDD, came up with some fantastic stuff. So it was a way that we could sort of leverage different disciplines. So artists who don't traditionally work in 3D could pick up this tool very quickly and produce imagery that was quite Lego.
Wonderful. Did you also work with real Lego bricks to test models?
Yeah, absolutely. We did a lot of reference shooting, and the great thing about shooting reference with Lego is that on previous projects like Happy Feet, we had to send someone to Antarctica for 2 months to shoot reference for us. On Guardians of Ga'Hoole, we had to, or Legends of the Guardian, we had to predominantly work from photographic reference. We had a few bags of real feathers and whatnot, but largely, we couldn't grab an owl and actually put it on our desk and manipulate its wings to figure out how it worked. We had to work from photographic reference for that. But here was a great opportunity because on everyone's desk, they had, whether you're an animator or a modeler or a surfacer or a lighter, you had the very thing that you were working on in your hand right there. So you could grab a camera, you could shoot it, anyone could just manipulate this stuff. And we didn't actually need to put a lot of time or energy into the way, like we did some very high-res reference photography of our minifigs, and in fact a lot of our surfacers had jewelers' magnifying glasses on their desks and would actually look very closely at each brick. But in the animation department and in the layout department, they would actually just grab their camera phone or any camera and actually shoot the material that they needed. And right there, captured in what they were doing, it was a handheld camera, it was quite shaky, the resolution was quite low, might not have been in focus, but right there were the very things that we were trying to capture, that kind of imperfection, that kind of handmade, that kind of crafted, not quite, clean look. I mean, these are all the things that we were quite deliberately putting into our high-res, quite high-fidelity CG to sort of bring it back down to that handcrafted look. So, it was fantastic just having the ability to grab something and take reference and it being very close to what you were trying to produce.
I heard even the animators could drag in bricks.
Yes.
How did that work?
Yes. So I mentioned the library that we built before. So what we wanted to do was we wanted animation to be a very sort of fun and creative environment where any idea could actually be explored. Similar to the way that modelers or even designers could explore Lego models in LDD, we wanted the animators to have that ability as well. So we built a tool that enabled them to pull in from the brick library. So any brick that had been modeled would be available to them through a little UI. They could drag that brick into their scene. It would automatically assign a little transform rig for them. So they could rotate and translate that brick around, key it, and then basically save that as part of their character and send that directly to lighting. And at that point, that brick would actually pick up the default surfacing that the surfacing artists had applied to that brick. So that was a way that we could very quickly, we could circumvent rigging, we could circumvent surfacing, although we still needed the surfacing assets to be checked in. But they could very quickly build something out of any brick that was available in the library and send that directly to lighting without the involvement of the other departments. So that really kind of helped things along. They came up with a lot of crazy ideas in animation, and that was encouraged. And that really sort of enabled us to do that kind of level of exploration without going through a whole design process and a rigging and a surfacing and delivering assets and sort of getting caught up in all that. So we could send stuff to lighting. That was just an idea that an animator had that the director liked. So it was very. We tried to facilitate a lot of that as much as possible, because the directors, they were very creative. They had lots of ideas, and they encouraged the animators at every level to pitch their own ideas at every level. So it was quite fun.
Yeah, that's interesting. So an animator could actually just have an idea and pitch that. And
so in dailies, they could show up and they could make a funny little creature, or have an obstacle for Emmett to tumble over, or build anything really out of bricks. In fact, there's one scene in the film. So the film has a bunch of what we call perfectors. So they're these robots that fly around correcting things. And there's one scene in the film, and I was quite surprised to see it, but an animator had actually rebuilt one of these perfectors at a smaller scale, because the perfectors are quite large. They didn't quite work for the shot, so they needed a smaller version of it. So they actually went about and built a smaller version of it themselves, just pulling the individual bricks into their shot and building it and animating it right there. So that was an example of the animators just having some fun and just grabbing the bricks and just having a go.
It sounds like that film was like an unusual workflow, really, where everybody seemed to have like a challenge and a say. Would you say that is something special?
Yes, I think definitely. I think the style, particularly of Chris McKay, he was very encouraging. He definitely wanted everyone's ideas in there. He never wanted to sort of shut the door on a good idea, so he would sort of leave it open. I mean, that didn't quite work for some animators. I mean, I think there was some pressure on some animators to constantly be funny and constantly pitch ideas. So that doesn't suit everyone. But definitely we got some very interesting stuff out of it, because some people really took to that and came up with some fantastic ideas. And in fact, it actually came from animation. There was so we knew we needed to be photoreal, and we wanted to be have this stop motion look, and we knew that we wanted to animate on twos to sort of get that stop motion look. But the problem with that is when we scale that up to cinema screen, how are we going to sustain a 90-minute film on twos without any motion blur? So that was a bit of a concern. So we did a lot of tests, and what we ended up doing was we came up with a brick-based approach to motion blur. So what we'd do basically is we'd take a character, we'd move it very quickly across the screen, and this just came from an animator just playing around with some bricks. They had the brick tool there, they had a character, and they did a little run. And basically the character starts to run, anticipates the run, starts to run, turns off, is replaced with a whole bunch of little 1x1s of the same color, but then stacked behind one another. And as the character moves quicker across the screen, the bricks get longer. We use longer and longer bricks. They basically built a streak of the same colors out of bricks to represent that character. And then when the character came to a stop, then the character would pop back on again. So there'd be a streak of bricks in the middle for a fast movement. And we saw that, and that was just, well, that's it. That's exactly how we have to do it. So that, of course, led to a lot of development, because we wanted to make that process as easy as possible, rather than having every animator, every time they wanted to blur something, get 1 brick, get 2 brick, get 3 brick. That was going to be crazy. But that idea came out of an animator playing around with the brick library and just pulling bricks into the scene and seeing what they could make from it. So.
You originally started as an animator, and well, now you're doing this. And I think it's actually interesting how many people who started out learning animation and went to animation school to become animators sometimes go off track and do something else. How did that happen for you?
Well, it happened for me. I guess I've done it a number of times. I started studying 2D animation at university, and that was right about the time that the first Toy Story film came out. So I saw that and went, wow. And living in Australia, the industry is quite small. So, you know, I think that was actually beneficial in a way because I could really see, you know, with a very small industry, you know, if it was changing from 2D to 3D, you could really feel that because there weren't many studios around. And then when, you know, the one or two studios that did 2D animation stopped doing 2D animation, we knew that, you know, things were changing. So I decided to change tracks and sort of pursue 3D animation at that point. And then the opportunity arose for me to work in games. So I did a number of years working in video games, and that was good because I got the opportunity. So I studied as a 2D animator and then started to sort of self-train into 3D, doing a bit of everything, modeling, rigging, animation, of course. And then working in games, I basically had to do a bit of everything, become a jack of all trades and do surfacing as well as modeling and rigging and animation. And then from there, basically, I got into doing a little bit of VFX on the side as a freelancer. And then from that sort of led to me being invited to work on the first Happy Feet film as an animator. So I guess it sort of all sort of culminated from there. And then once I got on the project for Happy Feet, it was very early and not much had been done in the way of models or rigging. So I was sort of on the ground floor of that. So I actually remember my first day, I was given a piece of geometry and a wave file, and my task was to animate this character. So I said, well, I'm going to need a little bit of time to rig this. So I went about and rigged the character and then animated it. So that's kind of how I sort of skewed into rigging at that point. You know, we started to build up a pipeline, and I was very involved in the rigging of all the characters on the first Happy Feet. And then, you know, about a year later, we started to really grow with animators, and kind of I just stayed with that track at that point. And so I moved from there into eventually CG supervision and sort of leading teams of modelers and riggers and surfacing artists. So yeah, it kind of just was a thing that evolved, and you know, I took an interest in the rigging process at that point. I was always very, I guess even from the beginning, I was a very technical animator. I was very precise and liked to have a very controlled line. So it kind of naturally led into that kind of work. So yeah.
Interesting. We asked our viewers if they would have some questions, and one of the questions by Chris on Animator Island was, what do you do apart from your normal job to unwind?
To unwind? I watch a lot of films, a lot of TV, play a lot of video games. I spend a lot of time with my family, 2 kids, so you know, I go to the park and play with them. I've also recently getting into quadcopters as well, which is quite fun. So, but more on that later, I guess.
Nice, nice. Do you do other stuff on the side, like animation and art related?
I used to. My first film that I produced at uni was kind of an unfinished work. It was a 3-minute short. It needed to be about 5 or 6 minutes. So that was 2D animated short. So for many years after that, while I was working in video games, I was sculpting and modeling and rigging the characters in 3D because I thought I would, you know, continue the piece in 3D. But yeah, that sort of fell away because the projects got bigger and bigger and more demanding. So my days are quite long. At the moment, I leave home at about 7 and I get home at about 7. So you know, it leaves very little time, especially with a family, to do any additional outside of work.
How would you say animating or working in the game industry is different from working in the film industry?
Well, I haven't worked in games in about 12 years, so it was quite some time ago. So the game industry has undergone a bit of a change, and I think there's a lot of really good talent in games. So when I was working in games, and particularly in Australia, a lot of the guys were quite generalists. And I think we all sort of needed to be jack of all trades to a certain extent. So I think, at least on the projects that I worked on at the company I worked for, it was a little bit free and loose, and pretty much everyone could do anything, although we did have dedicated sort of environment artists and character artists. But it was a very sort of flat structure. So, you know, that was kind of nice to work in. And of course, when you work in films, especially the scale of the Lego movie, it sort of demands a lot more structure, a lot more departments, a lot more specialists, so that we can basically, you know, achieve the look, the level and the scope that we need to. So I guess that was a bit of a change there for me. Smaller teams, longer projects, a little bit more freedom, as opposed to bigger projects, bigger crew sizes, more specialty.
Which way do you prefer?
I kind of like managing the big teams. It's really interesting putting all the parts together and figuring out how they interlock, and how you can best support your artists and enable them to focus on the thing that they're good at, and figuring out how to actually get that bit that they're good at to the next guy who's good at something else, and to keep that going, and then basically scaling it up to the bandwidth that we need to achieve as many shots as we needed to achieve at the level of quality that we needed to do for the Lego movie. So that's kind of a fun sort of puzzle to figure out. And we're always sort of finding new ways of doing that and trying new things on each project to do that better, do that faster, do that bigger, and basically essentially offload a lot of the boring work and have our artists just focus on the creative task.
The last question. What would you give as an advice to an aspiring animator, or in general anybody who wants to work on CG films?
I guess the best advice I could give someone would be to talk to someone who works in the industry, if you can, about what their day-to-day work is like, the state of the industry, you know, their kind of I guess job history to a certain extent. Because one of the surprising things when I got into the industry was just how much the role of an animator was a bit of a freelancer, and how they moved from project to project and traveled around the world. So, you know, I guess I kind of moved into animation because it was a fun thing to do, and I didn't really sort of think through the sort of long-term career aspirations of an animator. So I think just thinking through what your entire career would look like, and then finding people who have those careers, like if your aspirations are to be a director or an animation director, or maybe you want to be an animator for the rest of your life, but talk to people, find people who actually do that for a living, and see if it's the right sort of lifestyle for you, whether you want to travel the world and have live in a different country every 3 years, if that's something that's exciting to you. That might not be exciting for you for your entire career, but for the beginning of it maybe. So I guess those sorts of things as realities of what certain roles are. And I guess there are different projects as well, there are small films and there are large films, and there are games, and there are small games and more interactive and more independent developers out there these days. So I mean, there are lots of different, I guess, levels at which you can engage in CG art. So I guess really sort of mapping out what your career would look like and talking to those individuals who have careers like that.
Okay, thank you very much.
What do you think about the Lego movie? And what about you? Has your career already made some twists and turns? What are your experiences in larger and smaller productions and games and films? Please let us know in the comments below, and also like, share and subscribe.